In this video, we share 3 chilling true stories from the night shift, experiences that will make you think twice about working after dark. So brace yourself for a journey into the unknown as we reveal the horrifying realities of the night shift. Bagging groceries had never felt dangerous. It was just another part-time job that people took to make ends meet. Like many, I viewed it as a monotonous but harmless routine. However, tough times can push people into difficult situations, and now I find myself in a position where I'm afraid with every shift. I never thought I would be concerned for my life while working at a grocery store, but here I am. Everything changed because of my son, Evan. After his mother died in a car accident, Evan became the sole focus of my life, and his well-being was everything to me. When he fell ill and needed medical treatment, I found out our insurance wouldn't cover the cost. Bills were piling up, and it was impossible to scrape together such a large amount on my meager paycheck. I needed $7,000 for Takaras for Evan's treatment. Faced with this impossible situation, I was forced to look for another job, which led me to the night shift. I was searching for a job that would fit my schedule, something that would allow me to work at night while keeping my daytime job intact. But there weren't many opportunities in our small town. Then suddenly, I stumbled upon a rundown grocery store on the edge of town, Harper's Midnight Grocery. It didn't look promising from the outside, and its hours were odd, open from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m., which felt strange compared to the larger 24-hour chains. Yet its schedule was perfect for me. It seemed like my opportunity. After finishing my day job, I arrived at the store, a mix of hope and anxiety swirling in my chest. My good neighbor, Lisa, had agreed to watch over Evan for a few months, giving me a little breathing room. As I approached Harper's, the building looked even more dilapidated than it had from the outside, dust-covered windows obscuring any clear view inside. One thing caught my eye: strange symbols under the store name that resembled the symbol for life. I later learned this was a Chinese character, but at the time I had no idea. Upon entering the store, I was taken aback. It seemed much larger inside than it appeared from the outside. The aisles were stocked with standard grocery items, cleaning supplies, and even some clothing. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but after a few moments, I sensed that something wasn't quite right. The people inside, the customers, seemed a bit odd. Some stared at me for an unusually long time, their eyes carrying an intensity that made me uncomfortable. One man in particular locked eyes with me for a few seconds, gazing as if I had committed some terrible crime. I quickly averted my gaze, but the feeling of unease lingered. Trying to shake off the discomfort, I made my way to the back of the store to meet the manager. Just then, I noticed a small sign that read, "Help needed, but not always." The words unsettled me. What could that possibly mean? But I was desperate, so I knocked on the door marked manager. As I pondered the strange wording, the door swung open. A large man emerged, his name tag reading, "Store Manager Roy." He wore a forced grin that felt off.
"Hello, how can I assist you?"
he said. His excessive enthusiasm made me slightly uneasy, but I explained that I was looking for a job. He quickly pulled out a radio and said,
"Tina, what's the status on baggers tonight?"
I couldn't quite catch what was being whispered from the other end, but I distinctly heard the words, "problem," and bagged it. For a few seconds, Roy's smile faded, casting a shadow over his face. But just as quickly, he resumed speaking into the radio, possibly calling a code blue. With a forced smile returning to his face, Roy turned to me and said,
"Congratulations, we're hiring a new employee. Can you start tonight?"
The rapidity of it all left me stunned. No interview, no application, just a job offer. Something felt amiss, but I needed the money for Evan. When Roy mentioned the pay of $60 per hour, I froze. $60 an hour for bagging groceries? My day job paid me less than half that. Yet again, I found myself focusing solely on that big check.
"Welcome to the Harper family,"
Roy said, slapping my back so hard I stumbled a bit. He called over another employee named Jim. A short time later, with Jim's instructions, everything became clear, and I was assigned my duties. For the past few weeks, I had been looking for a job like this. So when I landed a night shift at Harper's Midnight Grocery, a 24-hour convenience store, it felt like a lifeline, a way to survive. The interview was extremely brief, and the manager, Roy, informed me that the job seemed simple: bag groceries and complete small tasks during closing. But there was a catch. Some strange rules had to be followed, which didn't quite fit the usual grocery store routine. With his ever-cheerful voice, Roy explained the store's peculiar guidelines.
The store closes at exactly 4 a.m. every day. Anyone still inside will be ushered out, with one exception: the code black customers.
That last part confused me. Code black? I was about to ask a question, but Roy cut me off before I could speak.
You'll learn fast. Let's get you to the checkout stand and start your shift.
Before I could say anything, he placed a hand on my shoulder and led me out of the back office. As we walked through the store, I noticed some customers smiled at us, while others seemed completely indifferent. Our destination was checkout counter number 3, where a light flickered. The other counters were buzzing with impatient customers. Roy cleared his throat and glanced at a young man with blonde hair at a distant counter, Lee. Lee barely acknowledged us, as though he didn't really want to be there. "Lee, this is our new bagger, just like me when I started." Then Roy added,
"Show him the ropes. And remember, no more robot incidents."
After that odd comment, Roy left me in Lee's care. Lee glanced at me with an irritated look and said,
"Just do your job and follow the rules. If something goes wrong, you won't be able to handle it."
I tried to lighten the mood with a smile, but Lee didn't respond. The first customer approached, and as Lee scanned the items, I instinctively reached for the bags. That's when I felt a sharp kick to my foot. Lee looked at me like I had made a serious mistake. "What's the problem?" I began to explain, but then realized I had already broken the first rule. I was supposed to ask the customer what type of bag they wanted. "Paper or plastic?" I quickly asked. "Paper," the elderly customer snapped without even looking back. I started bagging his groceries: fruit, dairy, a set of kitchen knives, and bullets. Despite how odd everything seemed, I had to stay silent and follow Roy's other rules. As the night wore on, the items in the checkout line became stranger. Customers were buying unusually large quantities of bullets, even a Kevlar vest. It was all happening so casually I didn't dare ask questions. A few uncomfortable moments later, a sweet elderly woman, Marge, came up to my register. She was buying baking supplies: flour, butter, eggs. It felt like a brief moment of relief in an otherwise bizarre night.
"You simply must try my raspberry tart, dear. It's incredible. I've got some in the car. Would you help me carry my bags out there? I'll give you a bite and a nice tip."
Before I could respond, Lee shook his head at me, a warning. That's when I noticed the other items Marge was purchasing: rat poison, bleach, and ammonia. A chill ran down my spine. I quietly answered, "Sorry, store policy. We're not allowed to help customers to their cars." Marge's smile turned cold and dark.
"You're lost, dear. I could have made it something special for you. Maybe next time I'll know exactly where to find you."
With that, she walked out to her car. I stood frozen as fear coursed through me. Lee nudged me to get back to work, but I knew I had narrowly escaped something terrifying. At exactly 4 a.m., the closing announcement came over the PA system. We all started preparing to lock up, but I couldn't stop thinking about the code black customers who were still inside. Just then, the lights flickered, and the entire store was engulfed in an eerie silence. It felt like we weren't alone anymore. Lee ordered me to leave quickly, but I couldn't shake the words "code black" from my mind. Roy had specifically told me never to ask about them, but something was pulling me in.
"Why haven't you left?"
Lee asked, frowning with discomfort in his voice.
"It's not safe to wait for them."
I couldn't hold back my curiosity. "Who are the code black customers?" Lee looked at me with a quiet intensity and said,
"They're not exactly human, and tonight they're here. You'd be smart not to dig any further."
At that moment, the doorbell chimed and a shadowy figure emerged in the dim light by the entrance. It looked like a skeletal figure without flesh, an awkward, terrifying form that silently crept inside. We all froze, Lee, Roy, and even the other employees. "They're coming," Lee whispered in fear. "Get out now or they'll take you." My body felt paralyzed. I was ready to run, but my legs wouldn't move. There was nothing I could do, and I knew that soon I would face the horrifying secret that Roy and Lee had been hiding from me. Whoever, or whatever, the Code Black customers were, I was about to find out. I worked the night shift at a small convenience store nestled in my suburban neighborhood. We sold snacks, drinks, milk, bread, and other common items that people wanted to grab without heading to a bigger market. There had been talk about adding a gas pump out front, but that plan never materialized. As a result, the night often dragged on with only a few customers trickling in. Of course, there was our usual druggie who strolled in to get his soda or use the restroom, but sometimes I would sit at the counter for nearly an hour before anyone walked through the door. It could get a bit boring, but I always had a good book or a YouTube video to keep my mind occupied. I was supposed to clean the store during the slow periods of my shift, and I did, but that chore rarely took long. Each night, usually around 1 or 2 a.m., I would finish the cleaning and find myself surfing the web or lost in a novel. That night was no different from any of the others I had experienced during my time on the night shift. It had been slow, and the store was quiet. No one had come in for an hour, and I was rereading my favorite Stephen King book when I suddenly heard a thudding sound coming from the inventory room. I jumped at the noise. I know, not very manly of me, but I hadn't expected it. Besides, I was at a particularly intense part of my book. I glanced at the digital clock on the counter. It read 3:12 a.m. I didn't think much of the noise at first. I assumed something had just fallen off one of the shelves. Still, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I remember glancing outside and seeing a thick sea of fog blanketing the landscape. This wasn't too uncommon. There was a lake across the street from the store, and occasionally fog would drift in. But I couldn't recall a time when the fog was quite as thick as this. At that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something could be standing out there watching me, and I wouldn't even know it. It was more than just a simple fear. I instinctively knew there was something out there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and gooseflesh broke out all over my arms. I was too frightened to get up from my spot at the cash register. I knew I should investigate the sound in the back room, but my body wouldn't respond. I sat there, unable to look away from the glass front door, desperately trying to peer through the thickening fog. I couldn't see anything, but I was convinced that if I turned away now, whatever was lurking in the dark would rush forward. The fear was multiplying, growing into a living creature trying to tear its way from my stomach. Cold sweat poured down my brow, streaming into my open eyes and causing them to sting. I couldn't blink. I was too worried about the consequences of doing so when I saw it. 2 pinpricks of light cut through the dense fog, temporarily blinding me. Panic surged through me, and my heart raced as I half-ducked behind the counter. My hand slid across the underside of the counter, searching for the panic button that would alert the police when the door swung wide. A burly man in a green jacket and black pants strolled in, an amused expression on his face. He looked at me, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Hey mister, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I sighed, feeling a physical weight lift off my shoulders. I looked at him and replied, "Yeah, sorry man, you just startled me. I couldn't see you approach the door with all that fog out there." "Hey, I hear you there. I could hardly see the road in front of me. Honestly, it's a bit unnerving out there. It makes you think some strange thoughts," said the man, his expression shifting to one of contemplation. "Right, I could have sworn someone was out there. I mean, I guess you were," I said with a nervous laugh. "Yeah, I was. It's nights like this that make one think," he replied seriously. I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me at his answer. He stood there motionless, staring at the door to the back room. I still hadn't investigated the noise, and the man's blank gaze made me uneasy. The silence in the room grew heavier, and I couldn't endure it any longer. I asked, "Think about what?" The man smiled a toothy grin and replied, "Life, death, and all the moments in between. I try not to think about the first two too often. After all, who can truly know?" I countered. The man stood silently for a moment, staring at me as if he could read everything in my mind. Then, in a cold voice, he said, "Do you know why I'm here?" I looked at him. "No. Why?" He took a step forward. "You might be thinking I'm just like everyone else, right? But I'm not. I'm here to offer you an opportunity." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of opportunity?" The man gave a faint smile, but there was something dark behind it. "Don't you want to know?" "I do, but what's the cost?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. He moved even closer and whispered, "The price is for you to decide. But remember, some prices once paid can never be returned." Then he took a couple of steps forward, coming fully into the light, and I noticed his features for the first time. He had a severe expression, a hawkish nose that looked as if it had been broken at least once. The landscape of his face was a jumble of cracks and wrinkles, dominated by a large scar that started just below his nose and continued through his lips, stopping at his jawline. What made me the most uneasy were his eyes. They were as black as tar, and they drilled into me. Making eye contact with him felt like looking directly into a black hole. They seemed to draw me deeper. There was a flicker of light shining in the middle of the man's pupil. I watched as it bounced and glowed, sometimes coming closer, sometimes drawing away. It was as if it was beckoning me to follow. When I saw that gleam, I wanted nothing more than to follow it, damn the consequences. There was a beauty to the way it pulsated that held me captivated. I looked and saw that secrets were waiting to be discovered in those depths. I also knew that if I followed the light, there would be no coming back. But I didn't care. I wanted to know. I wanted to see. The mysteries of the universe were held in that gyrating light bobbing in the abyss. I felt my soul being ripped from my body, torn from my essence, and sent spiraling down that black tunnel toward that brilliant light. It was the same crashing sound I had heard from the back room that broke the trance. I looked away from those eyes and was thrust back into reality. My mind was scrambled, and it took me a second to regain my composure. The creature standing before me looked just as confused as I was, clearly not used to its prey escaping so easily. For a moment, we stared at each other in utter shock. The man smiled at me, revealing jagged, pointed teeth. I looked away in disgust, trying to locate the silent alarm button beneath the counter. My hand brushed the button, and I pressed it with all my strength. The man remained standing there, absolutely motionless. He could have been a statue for all I knew. He didn't breathe, nor did his heart beat. Those black eyes never blinked, and I didn't dare make eye contact with him. Finally, he looked down at his watch and said, "The time is nearly here." With that, the man turned and strolled directly out the door he had come through. I watched him walk casually into the fog. I couldn't see clearly, so I'm not entirely sure what I saw. But still, the figure almost seemed to melt away as if evaporating into the mist. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. To this day, I still don't know what I saw that night. I do know this: there are things that walk in the dark that man knows nothing about. It's best to avoid certain watches of the night. I stay at home these days, working in the safety of the daylight. Once I tried to watch the security footage. All that can be seen is the front door opening and closing at 3 in the morning. No one came in, no one left. There was nothing but the fog that enveloped the landscape. No one believes me, and frankly, I don't blame them. I don't know how to explain what I felt or saw that night. But if there is one lesson I learned that night, it is this: if you see the truth staring back at you, sometimes it's best just to look away. When I first started working at the nursing home, I felt a mix of excitement and inexplicable fear. This nursing home was notorious for its dark history. It had been closed for 15 years and had just recently reopened. My mother had worked there at one time, and from her experiences, I knew that many patients had stayed there who had passed away under mysterious circumstances. So, as I stepped in as a CNA, a shroud of darkness and fear always surrounded me. On my first day, I felt a bit uneasy. That night, we had only 2 patients in the nursing home, with about 70 rooms remaining empty. The building had a long hallway that branched into 2 sides. Entering those empty corridors felt eerie, as if an unseen presence was watching. Ahead of us was a quarantine room, designed for patients who might have problems in the future. That night, while another nurse and I sat in front of the quarantine room, the call light suddenly turned on by itself. At first, I thought it was a technical glitch. However, that night, the call light continued to illuminate, even when we were certain no one was inside. The nurse and I shared terrified glances. We decided the call light might be malfunctioning, so we unplugged it. But a little while later, as the night deepened, the same thing happened again. When we entered the room, we found the light still unplugged and the bathroom shower was running. Water dripped from it, and in the corner of that dark room, I felt an unusual presence in the air. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as the same events occurred over the next few nights, I began to lose my conviction. The strange history of our nursing home reminded me that this place was full of a haunted past. Then, during one night shift while I was attending to the patients, I noticed one elderly woman who appeared very distressed. She kept telling me,
"I see a man."
I would reassure her, "It's probably just a dream." But when she said,
"No, I really see him and he's calling me,"
I was filled with dread. Still, I tried not to give her words much weight. However, one night I heard a scream coming from an elderly woman's room. Rushing there, I found her on the floor, trembling with fear. She said,
"He pushed me."
I was horrified and looked around. There was no one there but the elderly woman and me. This patient had been admitted to the hospital months earlier due to a severe medical condition, and I knew she would never return to a normal state. Finally, during another night shift, I was talking to a female patient who had been quite weak. I asked her, "Do you need anything?" She replied,
"No, but I saw a man here this evening."
I wondered, how could she have had such an experience? After all, no men worked in our nursing home, so curious, I inquired about this man. The description she gave matched perfectly with that of a deceased patient who had passed away just a few days before. I was left speechless. Since coming to the nursing home, I had faced strange and terrifying occurrences that left me shaken. Their words, combined with the nursing home's eerie history, began to haunt my thoughts. I decided to visit the local library to uncover the reasons behind these events. There, I gathered detailed information about the nursing home's past. Many old newspapers and documents indicated that once there was a male patient who had been exceedingly troubled before his death while staying in the quarantine room of the nursing home. His name was John, and he had spent a long time in that nursing home. An unusual incident surrounded John's death. He had been ill for a long time and was placed in the quarantine room. While staying there, he began exhibiting strange behavior. He was often heard talking about horrifying dreams, saying, "I see a dark shadow coming towards me." Despite the nurse's attempts to calm him, his mental state continued to deteriorate. One night, when the nurses went to check on him, they found his room completely dark. As they called for him, the fear was evident in his eyes. He said,
"It's here. I can't escape anymore."
Just then, the room lights flickered on, and he screamed, collapsing to the floor as his body temperature plummeted. Ultimately, John died that night, but ever since, the nursing home has been shrouded in a haunted atmosphere. Following his death, it was said that his spirit remained, and from then on, anyone who ventured near the quarantine room would encounter strange happenings. These revelations filled me with even greater dread. I realized that the unease I felt might not be unfounded. Understanding the oddities of the nursing home made me increasingly fearful of working there at night. The following night, when I returned for my shift, I sensed that someone was watching me. I quickly turned around, but there was no one there. My heart raced. I knew that the dark history of this nursing home would never allow me to find peace again.